Hello, everybody. If you were unable to attend class, this is just going to go over the few slides that we went over. These are some common themes that we need to kind of touch base on about the Chinese dynasties, since we're not all being exposed to every single dynasty in depth as the others. These are just common themes and understandings that we need to get about ancient China. So the first theme is don't mess with the peasant. Peasants make up the majority of the population, so that means that they are going to be able to really hold a lot of control. Even though they're not the rulers, technically, they can still, have power in other ways. So dynasties that practice Confucian principles such as merit and Ren end up lasting longer. The harsh rulers tend to either be overthrown and killed or spark rebellion. If you have the Qin or Sui dynasty, that should be prevalent to your understanding. And we'll kind of talk about that when we go over the dynasties together. Legalism, abuse of peasants for public works, and lack of social mobility are normally markers of a failing dynasty. So those that follow Confucianism last longer because they tend to have less of those kinds of things going on. There's a little bit more social mobility with Confucianism because technically even the poor are able to get educated if they desire and they try super hard. It is more difficult for them, but they are technically allowed to. And so they are able to work their way up. They can get educated. They can become a part of the civil service even. So don't mess with the peasants. The second one is trade brings flourishing. So trade is good. Trade brings flourishing. Dynasties that focus on trade and expanding trade tend to have better economies and better standards of living. So you're going to have a better economy because goods are going to be flowing through China. People are going to be trading things with one another. People are going to have more money. The government's going to have more money. In terms of standard of living, ideas and technology grow during times of trade. When you're trading, you're moving around, you're meeting new groups of people, you're being exposed to other groups of people. And so that's going to allow for ideas to travel and for technology to expand based on those ideas. So dynasties that invest in trade tend to last longer. Trade allows for the increase of technology because of the exchange of ideas, which is what I just talked about. And then that allows for China to be a major power for a couple thousand years. So far we've talked about don't mess with the peasants and trade brings flourishing. And the final one that we're going to talk about for today is isolationism leads to failure in the long run. In class, we talked about what it means to be an isolationist. And we kind of said, right now with everything that's going on, it's very relevant because sometimes people, if they have COVID, they might have to isolate themselves. So isolation is being separated from something else, from everybody else. So it may be that you are isolating yourself from everybody, or it could be that a country is isolating themselves from other countries, or a state is isolating themselves from other states. So too much of an internal focus, too much of a focus on their own country, on their own state, leads to several problems. The first is a struggling economy. If you're an isolationist and you're focusing internally, you're going to suffer in terms of trade. Trade allows for economic growth, but emperors that focused too heavily on public works did so at the cost of the peasants. It's also going to create a technology gap. So isolationism limits the amount of new ideas being introduced. We talked about how ideas kind of get exchanged with trade, really. And if you're not having trade, those ideas aren't being exchanged either. And so isolationism limits the amount of new ideas being introduced. And that allowed for China to fall behind technologically, which would eventually allow for European imperialism. And we talked about what European imperialism is. That is just basically like when Europe starts to colonize different countries. And so they establish colonies in different places. There's colonies in Asia, there's colonies in Africa, and eventually they colonize the Americas once those are discovered. And so that is what European imperialism is. So the three themes that we touched base on are don't mess with the peasants, trade brings flourishing, and isolationism leads to failure in the long run.